Thank you for joining us for the 6th Annual Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership. I'm Dr. Randy Adkins. I'm the Senior Associate Dean in UNO's College of Arts and Sciences. I'm a professor of political science, and I'm the director of the Hagel Forum's Planning Committee. The purpose of this event is to explore critical issues with global leaders in search of solutions to today's global challenges, the kind of challenges to which Secretary Hagel has devoted his entire life. This evening's forum will feature opening remarks by Eric H. Holder, Jr., the 82nd U.S. Attorney General of the United States, followed by a discussion with Attorney General Holder and Secretary Chuck Hagel. The conversation will be moderated by Dr. Jody Nethery-Castro, UNO's Interim Associate Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement and a professor of political science, and she'll be using questions submitted in advance from UNO students in the campus community. This year's forum is again hosted in partnership with the Atlantic Council, a nonpartisan organization that galvanizes U.S. leadership and engagement in the world in partnership with allies and partners to shape solutions to global challenges. At this time, please turn your attention to the screen for a welcome video from Fred Kemp, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Atlantic Council.
Good evening. I'm delighted to join you from Washington, D.C. for the 6th Annual Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership, hosted by the University of Nebraska, Omaha, in partnership with the Atlantic Council. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to be working with the University of Nebraska, Omaha on yet another important conversation on the role of U.S. leadership in a changing world. Tonight, you'll hear from someone who actually needs no introduction in Nebraska, Secretary Chuck Hagel. Secretary Hagel is a highly accomplished statesman and strategist, someone I've had the pleasure of working with for many years. From his service in Vietnam, earning him 2 Purple Hearts, to his leadership of the USO, his 2 terms in the Senate, and his tenure as Secretary of Defense, he has dedicated his life to public service and proven his understanding of the challenges of today's world and the role of U.S. leadership. He served as the Atlantic Council's chairman from 2009 to 2013, during a time of remarkable growth at the Council. I was honored to have worked with him as our organization endeavored to shape the global future alongside partners and allies. He is now our distinguished statesman and a member of our International Advisory Board. This evening, you will also hear from former United States Attorney General Eric Holder, who after his time at the Department of Justice was nominated to various posts by President Ronald Reagan and President Bill Clinton. Mr. Holder was then a partner at Covington & Burling in Washington before he was sworn in as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, the first African American to hold that post. He is now back at Covington and advising on complex international investigations and litigation, and he continues to dedicate his life to protecting the security, the rights, and the interests of the American people. I can think of few more accomplished leaders better suited to discuss the role of U.S. leadership alongside Secretary Hagel. So, Secretary Hagel, former Attorney General Holder, we at the Atlantic Council and the University of Nebraska, Omaha could not be more delighted to host you for what I'm sure will be another great installment of the Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership. Back to all of you in Omaha.
It's now my pleasure to introduce UNO Chancellor Joanne Li. Since joining UNO, Dr. Li has focused on positioning the university and Omaha as a partner with the state's workforce development leadership through innovative approaches to teaching, learning, working, research, affordability, and partnerships, as well as student retention and support. As a first-generation college student and a native of Hong Kong, Dr. Li has a passion for serving learners of all ages and all social, cultural, and economic backgrounds, and ensuring that UNO Mavericks have the resources and support they need to excel in their academic, personal, and professional journeys. Dr. Li earned her PhD in finance from Florida State University and holds the Chartered Financial Analyst Charter designation. She's a highly engaged leader and scholar who's committed to fostering academic research, excellence, community partnerships and engagement, a welcoming and diverse environment, critical thinking and creativity and discovery, high integrity, and a maverick spirit that drives our university community to transform life locally, nationally, and globally. Please join me in welcoming UNO's 16th Chancellor, Dr. Joanne Li.
Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of University of Nebraska, Omaha, thank you for making time to share a wonderful night with us. Before this forum, Secretary Hagel made a statement. He said, "Today is a defining moment for the world." The statement itself is very insightful, I think. So Chuck Hagel Forum, created 6 years ago with a big vision. We're here to try to explore critical issues with global leaders, such as our former US Attorney General, Eric Holder, to try to find solution for global challenges. And I think this vision is so aligned with UNO, our university, your university, as an urban university to try to elevate the civic engagement of our community. Your participation means a lot to this urban university. We will continue to be that university to engage this kind of conversation. So without wasting a lot of your precious time, I just want to say thank you for spending tonight with us. I hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Now it's my honor to introduce the very person that has brought us here today. A fellow UNO maverick, a servant leader, and a true example of what it looks like to serve our community and our country. Chuck Hagel was the 24th United States Secretary of Defense. He's the only Vietnam veteran and very first enlisted combat veteran to serve in that position. Prior to serving as Secretary of Defense, Secretary Hagel served 2 terms in the United States Senate representing the state of Nebraska, as co-chairman of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and as the Deputy Administrator of the Veterans Administration. Secretary Hagel has pursued many opportunities to be actively engaged within the spheres of global leadership in our community, our state, our nation, and the world. Secretary Hagel was born in North Platte, Nebraska, and is the oldest of 4 brothers. He graduated from St. Bonaventure High School in Columbus, Nebraska in 1964, and he is a 1971 graduate of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Please join me in giving a hearty welcome to Senator Chuck Hagel.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming tonight. I know you've got other options with your time, but I'm personally appreciative that you would choose to spend some time with us tonight, not only because this is a program that I so fervently believe in, but because we have a guest with us tonight in Eric Holder, who is a remarkable individual. We know of so many people who have accomplished so much. You all are accomplished. We all accomplish things in our own way, but Eric Holder has really been a remarkable public servant for this country and the world, and I'm very grateful that he would come to Omaha and spend a little time with us tonight. You know some of his background, like the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. He served in that position for 6 years. He was Deputy Attorney General before that. Served a number of years in the Justice Department. He was an Associate Justice in the D.C. Supreme Court. But he's done many other things with his life. And I want to relay just one incident that gives you some sense of what kind of a person he is. I served with him in the Obama cabinet. And I had just taken office as Secretary of Defense in February of 2013, and he invited me to have lunch with him in his office at the Justice Department. I had never been in the Justice Department, never been indicted, so I don't know if that, well, there's no more to say there, but He invited me because he wanted to get acquainted a little bit, because we not only served in the cabinet together, but probably more importantly and more frequently, we saw each other in meetings in the National Security Council. And people don't realize that the Attorney General has such a preeminent position with our national security. And no point in giving us all a civics lesson tonight on it, but the Attorney General is really critical to national security. So I worked very closely with him on the National Security Council. But he wanted to get acquainted with me a little bit. He wanted to reassure me that he was there to help me anytime I wanted his help, call him anytime. I left that lunch that day with my chief of staff, and that really affected me because, first of all, you don't see that kind of behavior that often in Washington. But the way he approached it and how he approached his job and my job and working together, and then the personal dynamic, how that all fits and how important that is, especially if you're going to be working together in those high-level positions. That's the kind of guy Eric Holder is. I mean, I could go on about his accomplishments and credentials, but I think most of you are aware of all of those. So you'll see tonight, I think, when we get into some questions and his thoughtful answers and analysis, what I'm talking about at the end of the evening. And again, I thank you all and appreciate what you do for UNO and for this community, because it shows. It does. Leibet and I get back here fairly often, and every time we come back, there's something new and something great, and it's leadership. And you all know leadership matters. So that will be my lead-in to my introduction to the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, leadership, Eric Holder.
Good evening. How are you? How are you, folks? There you go. There you go. That's a Nebraska thing. All right. It's an honor to share the stage with you and with our moderator, Jody Nethery Castro. It's always good to see Chuck Hagel. We did some interesting things we probably can't even still talk about. But this is a good man. This is a very, very good man, and we need more men like him in both parties in Washington, D.C. now, Now, for me, as for so many of you, this gathering, I think, is in a very consequential place. Not just a meeting place for leaders and future leaders like all of you, but also this is a proving ground for ideas and for vital policy solutions. And I think these types of gatherings serve as a repository not only of our national memory, but also as an incubator for the path forward. Now, as I stand before you today, I'm reminded of a particular gathering hallowed by sacrifice and shaped by a turbulent era. What I thought I might do with my remarks tonight is to kind of go through a bit of history that I think is relevant, and then try to bring that history forward and talk about why I think it is relevant. So bear with me. As I said, I want to go back and use history as a means to understand our present, and also as a way in which we could plot our future. I want to commemorate tonight an extraordinary and a really courageous speech by probably one of my favorite presidents. Obviously, Barack Obama is my favorite president. Let me make that perfectly clear. I understand this is being videotaped, so I want to make sure that if he ever sees it, Barack, I love you better than anybody, wherever the camera is. But an extraordinary and courageous speech by President John F. Kennedy. Now, in my view, this particular speech is, I think, one of his most significant. Every single word rings with conviction and with moral clarity, making the case and pointing the way forward to what would become the signature achievements of the civil rights era and modern America as well. And though it focused primarily on one issue, it brings to mind a way of looking at our nation today and the unsolved racial, ethnic, and class problems that I think continue to divide us. But the story of that speech and of that day, and this is June 11th of 1963, did not begin with President Kennedy himself, nor with Attorney General Robert Kennedy, nor with anybody else in the administration. It began, in a sense, with two brave students. One was named James Hood, and the other person was named Vivian Malone. Now, as I look around this crowd, you all look distressingly young, and I realize that not everyone here was alive in 1963. But I can assure you that those of us who lived through that consequential year will never, ever forget it. From Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail in May, to the dream that impelled his March on Washington in August, from the iconic strategy for peace that President Kennedy described at American University just one day before his address on civil rights, to his inspiring trip to Berlin later that same month, from the March on Washington in August, to the 4 young black girls murdered as a result of a bombing in Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church in September, and then ultimately to that dark November day in Dallas that forever changed the fabric of this nation. 1963 was a year of hard-won triumph and unimaginable tragedy. And that was the context in which James Hood and Vivian Malone stepped into history. This was the raucous, unsettled America that they knew. Now, our America today is not far enough away from that nation at that time. But of course, making history was the last thing on their minds. All James and Vivian wanted to do was to go to school. Both were really exceptional students. Both had been fighting for well over a year, first with university officials and then in court for the right to apply and then to enroll, like any other state qualified resident, at the University of Alabama. Now, along the way, both endured threats and harassment simply for refusing to concede their most basic rights, rights that were eventually vindicated in court and enforced by the United States Department of Justice. Now, we all know what happened next. Alabama Governor George Wallace refused to back down, staging his infamous stand in the schoolhouse door. And the nation watched as Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach peacefully escorted both James and Vivian onto campus. They enrolled, and in the Oval Office, President Kennedy prepared to address the nation that evening. So when the American people tuned in that night, they witnessed something that I think was really extraordinary. The President of the United States speaking forcefully from the heart, and at significant times, extemporaneously, about what he described as both a domestic crisis that transcended politics and a moral issue that he said was as old as the scriptures and as clear as the American Constitution. And he went on, and I quote, "If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who will represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay?" Content with the counsels of patience and delay. President Kennedy knew that the promise of America, the promise of the New Deal, including the Social Security Act, had largely gone unrealized for people of color, and that this country's chronic failure to pass an anti-lynching law, along with widespread economic and electoral discrimination, had set the stage for a widespread and vicious American apartheid. By 1963, he was more determined than ever to dismantle it. "Those who do nothing," he told the American people that night, "are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality." Then on live TV, the president did something that I think is truly remarkable. Having read most of his speech from the prepared text in front of him, he discarded the ending of his remarks, looked directly into the camera, and spoke extemporaneously, without consulting his notes or breaking eye contact, for a full 2 minutes. Now, if you ever see the video of this, you can see the moment when it happens, and you can hear the passion and the conviction in his voice. "I'm asking for your help," he said, "in making it easier for us to move ahead and to provide the kind of equality of treatment which we would want ourselves, to give a chance for every child to be educated to the limit of his talents, unquote. Now, even at that time, as a 12-year-old kid, that made a deep and lasting impression on me. And believe it or not, I remember watching all of this unfold on a television that night, on a tiny black and white screen in the basement of our family home in Queens, New York City. And for some of you, TV used to be in black and white. The newsreel images of James and Vivian that day I saw on that same screen, the forthright and full-throated power of the speech of a man who remains a hero to me this day. All of that I saw on TV that night. And even then, I found his words inspiring and unforgettable. It felt almost like he was speaking directly to and about me. I mean, how extraordinary and how rare for a president of the United States to connect so deeply on a heart-to-heart level with someone whose experience of the world could hardly be more different and unformed. Sitting in front of the TV that night, I never could have imagined that I, a black kid from Queens, would someday be entrusted with the office that Robert Kennedy once held, let alone long after Vivian became the first African-American graduate of the University of Alabama, the first. I would meet and later marry a brilliant, beautiful doctor named Sharon Malone, who happened to be Vivian's younger sister, making Vivian my sister-in-law. But what? And as I was telling Chuck and a little bit, I married up. And for all you guys out there, that's the way to go. But of course, you know, we cannot celebrate the triumph of June 11th, the day of hope, triumph, tactical brilliance, and unprecedented commitment, without also confronting the shock and grief that greeted us the very next morning. Now think about this. University of Alabama, triumph, tactical brilliance, but then the very next morning, America awoke to the news that just a few hours after that great speech, the civil rights leader Medgar Evers had been shot in the back of his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi. He died at a local hospital a short time later, having initially been turned away, even though he was a veteran and a resident of Mississippi, denied treatment because of his race. He was only 37 years old. But there's more. The same day that Medgar Evers died, Fannie Lou Hamer, after being viciously beaten in a Mississippi jail for engaging in voter registration activities, was released from that jail with injuries that would ultimately shorten her life. All within one day. Once unthinkable progress tempered by unspeakable tragedies. Now that's the story of June the 11th. It's the story of 1963 writ large, a year of exhilarating highs and existential lows. More broadly, it's the story not just of the Kennedy era, but of the American experiment itself. A nation founded on dissent and forged through revolution, born of competing and contradictory visions for how we should govern ourselves, what we should stand for, which voices would be heard, and who we, as a people, might aspire to become. You know, it has been said that being president doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. Now, we've seen this in graphic, disturbing ways, I think, with regard to our penultimate president. In my view, June the 11th, 1963 was the day, more perhaps than any other, that revealed John F. Kennedy as the person and the president we know and who I revere today. Complicated and human, like the rest of us, but uncommonly determined, decisive, wise, and compassionate, with an exceptional vision for his country and a righteous fire in his veins. Still, as much as June 11th revealed about the man in the Oval Office, it reveals even more about the nation that elected him. Now, and I say reveals in the present tense because it's hard not to feel, even 60 years later, that this moment in history is in direct conversation with our own. Out of that day grew legislation that transformed the nation by calling to end segregation, ban employment discrimination, and safeguarding the right to vote. President Kennedy outlined what became the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and also paved the way for the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and other vital and much-needed reforms. Now, for me, it's painful even now to see those iconic photographs of those signing ceremonies for each of these landmark laws, because the only person missing from each photo is the one who did more than anyone to make them possible, who gave his life, and whose memory is brought to my mind by my remarks today. Which brings me to the most pivotal question before us this evening. And that is, where are we today? If President Kennedy had lived, in the words of his brother, to comb gray hair, would he be satisfied with how far we have come? 60 long years after the stand in the schoolhouse door and that great call to arms, is this nation, are we as a people what he envisioned and what he expected? Now, it's true that in ways big and small, this country has made undeniable progress. You know, one of my grandmothers was born in 1870. My family is only 2 generations removed from slavery. Yet I, a son of immigrants from Barbados, was afforded the breathtaking opportunity to serve with Chuck Hagel, and to serve my country as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. Now, if that alone isn't a testament to the scale of change that is possible when leaders like John Kennedy and so-called ordinary people like Vivian put their shoulders to the wheel of history, I don't know what is. The decision by the Supreme Court outlawing a racial gerrymander just last June in a case brought by the organization that I now lead, yet another case that was centered in Alabama, is another indicator of progress based on the words President Kennedy spoke in 1963. Vivian was present on the day the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed into law and went on to head the Voter Education Project. You know, President Kennedy's words and actions 60 years ago put her in a position to impact the nation then and all of us even today. Now, this history lesson gives me what I would like to discuss with you this evening. You know, progress is great, but progress is not a goal. Progress is a measure of commitment. It's a marker in time, and it must be built on the foundation of hard truth and historic knowledge. We don't work for progress. We struggle for the end states of equality and justice. Today, the hard truth is that while this country has taken meaningful steps forward, we can no longer be content with the notion of stuttering, incremental progress. The hard truth is that on major questions of race, gender, policing, justice, education, democracy, and equality under law, progress too often masks the reality that we are still mired in the struggles of a bygone century. I mean, how much longer must we wait to reach that truly free and equitable end state? How much further must we march to see the promised land? Today is an anniversary, a sad anniversary, the death of Martin Luther King. And to hear him talk about going to the mountaintop and seeing the promised land and saying that, you know, I may not get there with you, but I've seen the promised land and you will get there. You know, how distant remains, though, that elusive ideal of the promised land and that ideal that draws people to our shores? How near is the more perfect union our founders envisioned and left us the humble tools to create together? So, my friends, this occasion is not just a time to look back, but to set a course for the future. Progress must not become an excuse for neglecting, in President Kennedy's words, to act boldly, recognizing right as well as reality. And we can no longer afford to be patient. In the 1980s, a reporter asked the great James Baldwin about the pace of change since the civil rights era. And this is a quote from him. "What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always tell me it takes time. Well, it's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time. How much time do you want for your progress?" Unquote. Now, like James Baldwin, Vivian was only 63 years old when she passed away, much too soon in 2005. I only wish you all could have known her and that we all could have heard from her instead of me, you know, this evening. Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dr. King were afforded even fewer fleeting years on this earth. And it has now been 6 decades since we lost President Kennedy, since that shattering news from Dealey Plaza marked not just a personal tragedy, but also a national trauma. It was a hinge point in world history. Yes, progress takes time, but it has taken Medgar's time, and Martin's time, and Fannie Lou's time, and Malcolm's time. It has taken Jack's time, and Bobby's, and Teddy's. It has taken Vivian's time, and my father's time, and my grandfather's. It has taken 73 long years of my time, and how many how many of yours? So today, let us ask again, how much time do you need for your progress? I want you to remember President Kennedy, to draw inspiration from the courage and the conviction that he showed 60 years ago, and to renew that clarion call, that vision of what we can become. But we should also leave this place with James Baldwin's righteous impatience ringing in our ears. Because what matters is not what the events of June 11th, 1963 signify in the great sweep of history. What matters is how we can make real, here and now, in our time, that which President Kennedy spoke about on that distant summer evening almost a lifetime ago. Now, in themselves and on their own, days like June the 11th and speeches like the one I referenced today do not transform the shape of our society, at least not overnight. And for Medgar Evers, who listened to the speech on the radio, even overnight would have been too late. But it is in these extraordinary moments, these complex and contradictory chapters in the life of our nation, that America's character is revealed and our future is determined. After all, stretching out before President Kennedy on that consequential night 60 years ago was a future that would hold much more than the chance for students like James and Vivian to earn a degree. Ahead lay more marches and sit-ins, boycotts and protests, and a Mississippi Freedom Summer that claimed the lives of Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney, all of which built the strength of a national movement, paving the way for yet more critical policy changes and reforms that were unrelated to race. Ahead lay Dr. King's vision of the mountaintop and the realization of parts of the dream that he, like President Kennedy and so many others, would not live to see. Ahead lay years of struggle, immeasurable loss, and tremendous sorrow. But ahead, too, lay the promise of a brighter dawn, the fulfillment of those aspirations set forth in our founding documents, and so many remarkable steps forward in our nation's ongoing journey toward equal rights and equal opportunity along a path that still stretches beyond the horizon. Lay ahead was a women's movement and a quest for equality for the LGBTQ community. So I hope you, like me, will leave this place later this evening feeling impatient, inspired and impatient. So be impatient. Be very impatient. Do not be satisfied with progress. I look to each of you, every single person in this room, for leadership and moral courage worthy of the concept of this great nation. Most of all, I thank you for all that you do and will do every day to keep that uniquely American vision alive, and for the honor of being here with you in the great state of Nebraska, in Omaha, with you this evening. Thanks very much.
My name is Jody Nethery Castro, and I serve as the Interim Associate Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement here at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and a political science professor. It's my great honor to get to work with Secretary Hagel on the many initiatives that he does with our campus. And it's my great privilege this evening to moderate this conversation between these two gentlemen. Let me give you a little bit of background for this discussion. Some of you in the room may remember that as the Cold War ended, America's position at the top of global order seemed secure. With democracy's victory over communism complete, the United States appeared poised to exercise an unchallenged, benevolent global leadership rooted in American values, democracy, and open markets. Yet 30-something years later, U.S. leadership and the international order it helped build with its allies in the wake of World War II face a number of complex challenges. This contemporary reality was the impetus for the creation of the Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership. So we've asked some University of Nebraska at Omaha students to think about these and other challenges, internal and external to our country, and how these will affect our position as a global leader. We received a number of questions. In many cases, I've tried to kind of combine the questions to cover a range of topics, and I've been told to direct all the hard questions to Secretary Hagel and the easy questions to our guest.
Typical attorney.
That's true, actually.
Well, without further ado, let's begin with the questions. Mr. Holder, you advocated using history to understand our present and to plot our future. And there's been a number of UNO students who want to understand your personal histories and how they influence your career decisions. Nazran El-Raksi, a UNO student government senator and political science major, asks about your background and how it shaped your motivation to pursue careers, particularly in public service, and what motivates you now to keep going, and how has that evolved during your career? I'll direct it first to you, Secretary Hagel.
Thank you, and thanks again, Eric, for your remarks, because I think they really framed the world and the challenges that we've faced today. I've always believed that each of us are shaped by our environment.
Just plotted the best path forward for, this wonderful nation.
I guess I would wonder too a little bit, maybe can direct a little bit of this to you, Attorney General Holder, the motive, and how did you sustain that? How have you sustained that motivation?
The presidential daily brief, we would go to, the FBI and go through all the raw intelligence for the last 24 hours. And it was, I'd come out of my house, kids had done their homework, my wife was in a good place with me, so I was feeling pretty good. You'd leave those briefings, and, raw intelligence, groups trying to do negative things to Americans all around the world, and I was always in not the best of moods when you leave those meetings. And so that reminded me on a daily basis that this is, what you're doing is unique, it's consequential, and you're not going to have the ability to do this for an extended period of time, so what are you going to do? And I try to look at every day with kind of an idea, what am I going to do today to try to make, move towards those goals that I had in my mind when I, raised my hand to be sworn in as the Attorney General.
That's great. I appreciate that.
But you always have some sense of what your day is going to be like when you get in there early in the morning and your chief of staff or your executive assistant says, Mr. Secretary, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 of these people need to see you immediately.
Not a good sign.
Not a good sign.
Not a good sign. No, that's not a good sign. Or to say, you're needed at the White House immediately.
Yeah.
That's not a good sign.
That's worse.
That's worse. That's worse.
It's not a good thing?
That's not a good thing. No.
Well, I have a couple of questions maybe to turn to on national and global security. I was struck by the fact that just 2 years ago, in March 2022, we had the Hagel Global Forum on Leadership. Russia had just invaded Ukraine a few weeks earlier, and we spoke that night with former Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano about just this, new invasion. Here we are in 2024, watching this conflict continue on. Some U.S. leaders are questioning even our continued support of Ukraine. I want to ask maybe if you could comment on the role of the U.S. at this time in this conflict, and also the issues domestically. How do we address maybe that difference in view? Maybe I'll direct it to you.
Well, first of all, Secretary Napolitano served with both Eric and I in the cabinet of President Obama. Well, I'll respond this way. There is a reason why the United States led in organizing a post-World War II world order. Because even the isolationist party of the Republican Party in the 1930s recognized after a 5-year world war that obviously drug us into it, there was no such thing as an isolationist position that would ensure safety of your country and security of the country. That was gone. And so I think that's the first reality that we came out of World War II with. And that that really shaped and framed and formed a bipartisan foreign policy, national security policy after World War II. And I think most of us all believed that was the right way to approach it. We built a collective security institution in NATO. We built the United Nations. We had a number of really critically important multinational institutions, the World Bank, IMF, WTO, which was something else at the beginning. But we recognized, the United States, that internationalism was our reality, was the foreign policy. And I often would say to people who question why we had bases and different allies and relationships around the world, and I said, the reason the United States can project power is because of our allies. Because if we did not have those relationships, we couldn't have our bases, we couldn't have our troops in certain areas of the world, we couldn't have submarine hangars. I mean, everything hinged on that projection of power where we could put our troops in coordination and conjunction with our allies, but in particular NATO. And so if you start there, as the world that was shaped under our leadership after World War II, that's worked pretty well. When you think there's not been a World War III, every world leader at the time went to their graves believing there probably would be a World War III, and certainly there'd be a nuclear exchange. Well, neither has happened. Doesn't mean it won't happen. The world is more prosperous than it's ever been, more freedom. I mean, we've got huge problems, yes, yes, yes. But when you look at the progress that's been made because of internationalism, because our friendships and partnerships and relationships, now that brings me to Ukraine. What Putin did a couple of years ago, he violated a world order that had never been violated since World War II. No European nation had been invaded by any other nation. I mean, we had the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 90s, but that was a totally different thing. So to recognize what Putin did and the threat to not just Ukraine, but the threat to Europe and the extenuating circumstances and dynamics that would come as a result of this, right. China, right. What they would learn from this, North Korea, I mean, all over the world, our adversaries, where there are dictators and authoritarian, dangerous authoritarian governments. This is also part of what we are dealing with if we let Ukraine go down. Now, I've been astounded really the last year when I see a lot of people who are in important positions say, well, let Putin do what he wants. It doesn't make any difference. It's not our problem. I mean, you talk about someone who is blind to recent history, just blind to reality. If this would happen, and if we don't support Ukraine, along with NATO has been supportive, if we don't do that, the consequences of this are going to be tremendously negative and dangerous for this country. Because one of the things it will do, it will force all nations of the world, especially our partners, and it'll probably fracture NATO, not to trust us, not to have any confidence in us. I hear this from ambassadors today, foreign ministers, defense ministers. How can we trust the United States if you don't understand the severity and the consequences if you don't help Ukraine, what's going on? And I mean, it has really bothered me and concerned me if we don't get this turned around. And if we don't get it turned around pretty quickly because of all the other issues in the world, what's going to happen is that Putin because he cares nothing for life. I mean, he just keeps throwing his people in, and that's just the way it is. Then Ukraine will have to surrender. They will have to go to the negotiating table and let Putin work his will. And what will come out of that is astounding. And why we have so many Americans who don't understand that, especially leaders, is really beyond me. And the only thing I can think of is just raw politics about that. But this is something you've got to turn that around, because when it comes to the security of this country, there is no politics, or there cannot be politics. We are Americans, and we all have to understand what the threats in the world are to us. Yes, to the rest of the world, but to us. But that has to be strong bipartisanship, which we've had up until just a few years ago. I know it took a long time on that, but
no, but I think what Chuck said is really important, in the sense that, we won the Cold War, and that led to still an imperfect world, but, as you said, unparalleled prosperity and peace, an extended period of peace. And that is all at risk by not coming to the defense of, the support of Ukraine. And as Chuck said, and I think very, very importantly, this is not simply a Ukraine versus Russia problem. How we react in this matter is being observed by despots and strongmen and dictators in other countries that don't necessarily have the best interests of the United States at heart. And what does China think there? We don't do anything for Ukraine, and there is a negotiated peace that in essence is a surrender by the Ukrainians. Well, what does that mean in terms of Taiwan and China? What will that mean for people in other parts of the world, dictators, strongmen, despots in other parts of the world who want to test this this alliance, this fabric that we put together, because it's even bigger than NATO. NATO might be the cornerstone of it, but that has had, the American commitments around the world have had the impact of keeping at bay the Putins of the world. Putin's, he's just the latest iteration of certainly what we've seen in Russia, but the latest iteration of people we see like that around the world. And an engaged and focused America has kept those people at bay. And I really worry that if the questions come from our friends and allies, where will America be? What will America do? That they will compromise, or that they will logically compromise, or that, as I said, these dictators will probe to find places where they can extend their influence. It might not be an invasion, a military invasion like you see in Ukraine, but they can create spheres of influence that are inconsistent with our view of what the world should look like post-World War II. And that gives me great concern. And this shouldn't be a partisan issue, You say, who won the Cold War? I'll tell you what president won the Cold War. It was President Truman, it was President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, President Nixon, Republicans, Democrats, all with the same focus. President Reagan, all with the same focus of standing up for the principles that I think have made this nation truly exceptional, and being willing to spend the money at the Defense Department, to be forceful, when is necessary, and to retreat from that bipartisan view of the world, I think is an extremely dangerous thing.
I want to do maybe a follow-up, and I haven't quite articulated this question, but I think that a lot of the students were asking things about really getting to the question of, do we still have that respect in the world? And particularly, I had some students asking about the situation with Israel and Gaza, and particularly this week with the aid workers who were killed. I think anyone who's having to do the make foreign policy for this country has a lot of dilemmas to navigate, and this is a particularly tough one, I know. it's polarizing in this country. And I guess the question is about the relevance of U.S. leadership when you have people questioning our moral authority and, do we still stand for human rights? How do you balance human rights and international security? I wondered if either of you cared to comment on that with regard to the dilemma that we're facing in trying to navigate a policy with Israel and Hamas war.
That's a hard question.
I don't think we have an appropriate amount of time for that, actually. Well, I'll just make a couple of general comments. I don't think anyone would disagree with this comment. This is as complicated part of the world situation as I think there is today, the Middle East. The history. 2,000 years of complicated history. This particular issue, Israel, the Palestinians, what's going on. I mean, I think you've got to go back to 1948 and review how was it and what was it that set up the current relationship in the Middle East, which allowed an independent land called Israel to be established, but at the same time said, President Truman signed it, that there would also be an independent land for the Palestinians. And I think you've got to go back to that time, and you could go back 200, 300, 500 years before that, but I think you got to go back to 1948 as the guiding purpose and line here as to where are we going, because since 1948 there have been so many ups and downs, I mean, everywhere. I mean, the last time I think we really saw an effort to really do something about this was during the President H.W. Bush administration. Jim Baker was over there over 50 times. And that resulted in the Oslo Accords that Clinton signed in '93. Unfortunately, the one Israeli leader who could have and was really starting to change things, Rabin, was assassinated by his own people. Then you had an Oslo 1995 that never really went anywhere. The Palestinians, unfortunately, have had bad leadership over the years, have been fractured. The Israeli leadership, other than Rabin, have never really taken seriously, I don't think, the 1948 agreement about an independent Palestine. And it just goes on and on and on. So if you get into a debate on this issue, both sides are going to be saying, yeah, but what about this? Well, what about this? So you never get anywhere. And I think where the president needs to be on this, and I've actually talked to him about this, and Eric and I just talked a few minutes ago about, but this is a tough problem for the president at this point for obvious reasons. Yes, Israel is an ally, an important ally for us, and we've been committed to them since the formation of Israel in 1948, and I think it's the right thing to do. But that cannot be at the exclusion of the 1948 agreement of trying to work toward an independent land, if for no other reason. This is all bad news for Israel. I mean, what's going on over there now? Even if Israel thinks that they can destroy Hamas, which I don't think that's possible for a lot of reasons, but that's another issue, but it's still a big part of the nucleus of this one. What they have done already, Israel, I mean, they have destroyed Gaza. There is nothing left in Gaza. So you take 2 or 3 million Palestinians, where are they going to live after this is over? I mean, how are they going to live? There's nothing there. Over 32,000 Palestinians have been killed. What Hamas did to Israel on October 7th was barbaric. No one can in any way justify that. Israel has a right to defend itself. Yes, yes, yes. But I think somebody's going to have, and I think this is where President Biden has been trying to go with this, is get this thing on a higher level so that you can start moving towards something that's going to accomplish some relative peace. This isn't going to be easy or soon. There are some opportunities that Israel has here. Saudi Arabia is moving toward, can be, has been. Abraham Accords build a little bit of this toward a relationship with Israel. Israel relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's those kinds of things that can elevate this and get it out of where it is. But it's going to take time. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take focus. In my opinion, the course that they're on now, that Israel's on now, that we're continuing to support, up until today, for the United States, up until today, what the president said today and what was announced today that's different. That's a warning shot to Israel. This can't continue, because what it's also doing for us, it's putting us in a situation where the world's against not only Israel, but us. And we're being told that too. How can you condone what you're doing? You're producing the bombs and the planes and so on that's killing all these people, kids and old people and so on and so on. I mean, why does Israel think that that's going to help them? That this is somehow going to end well? It's not going to end well. It's going to be worse than it's ever been. And where I think President Biden wants to go here on this is to move this in a different direction. It's been difficult, but what he said today was really critical. Now, I mean, again, we could be talking about this and everybody's got an opinion for a long, long time, but in a fairly short time frame, that's kind of where I am on it. I think you've got to go back and, again, understand the history and try to get back to that time, and then elevate things and move things up and put it on a path where you can start to bring some progress to a relationship between the Palestinians and the Israelis, where the Palestinians have some hope, but it's also got to be from the Palestinian side as well. I mean, the Hamas has got to go. They can't have any part of leadership. The Palestinian Authority is a joke. It's weak. I mean, so there's so much that's got to be done here, but you got to start it somewhere, and the United States is the only country that can help do that.
But I think what's really significant is what a former Secretary of Defense said, and whose judgment I've always trusted. Israel's not going to be able to destroy Hamas, through what they are doing. And then the question becomes, well, what are the ultimate aims of this, and what are the ultimate results? You think about those 7, 8-year-old boys who survived this. What are they going to be doing 10 years from now? Who are they going to be? How are they going to view Israel? From my perspective, Hamas needs to be held accountable. Hostages need to be released. Israel has the right to defend itself, but the tactics being used by the Netanyahu regime, and I'm in my own mind, I tend to separate, Israel and the population there from, I will just say it, I think extremists in the Netanyahu regime who have, Netanyahu comes to power opposed to the notion of a two-state solution. He wins a very close election. And I think, he made some really tactical blunders here. Having the Qataris fund Hamas so that you have, different poles when it comes to the Palestinian leadership. You've got Hamas here, support them, keep the Palestinian Liberation Authority, keep them, the PLO, keep them weak. It's the security blunders that occurred, with the intelligence failures, and in the way in which this war has been conducted. Now, you'll know better than me. I don't know exactly how the war should have been conducted, but I can say that the way it has been conducted is extremely disturbing to me, and I think has caused an unnecessary loss of life and does not serve the interests of Israel in the long term, both in terms of its interaction with the rest of the world and for Israel itself. You're not going to just take, 2-3 million people and make them disappear. They're going to be somewhere, and somewhere relatively close to Israel, and that next generation, either in Gaza, coming out of Hezbollah, somewhere, these are folks who are going to have a negative view and revenge in their minds about what happened in Gaza in 2023 and in 2024.
That point may be the most important point of all of this. A 7-year-old sees his whole family wiped out. Do you think he's going to be a young man of peace?
Yeah, I wouldn't be, you know.
No, I mean, it makes it worse for Israel, and I don't understand how. Well, Netanyahu's a different story, but you said it very nicely about him. But I've known Netanyahu a long time.
And you know,
he's a problem.
It's a place where you need big men, big women, to decide and to do big things. And there's been a failure of leadership on both sides, you know. Arafat had chances to build a Palestinian state. Didn't get everything that he wanted in the negotiations, but that's kind of the nature of negotiations. But there was a basis there to build a Palestinian state, and turned his back, you know, on that. Netanyahu, I think, is a small man, you know, and is not doing things that are in the best interests of his country, is focused on his political survival. His policies, I think, are not big in the way that I think you need. You know, you think about, you know, South Africa, and we laud Nelson Mandela, and we should. But Mandela probably is not successful without de Klerk, you know, being willing to give up power in the way that, you know, that he did. And that's why they shared the Nobel, you know, the Peace Prize. And that's what you kind of need in that region. And it's what we have not seen for year after year after year.
Yeah. Just for anyone that didn't see the news today, President Biden, that you referred to, at least appeared to condition future U.S. support on how Israel treats civilians and kind of deals with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So I think...
And essentially changing tactics and changing approaches. No, it was a very significant, evidently, conversation the two of them had this morning, Netanyahu and Biden, and how what was announced afterward is probably the most significant thing that we've heard in the last few months about that part of the world and our position.
It's time. It's time to have that conversation.
Stay tuned on this one, yeah. I want to connect back to your keynote, Mr. Holder, and the focus of much of your post-cabinet work and since leaving office. When you were Attorney General, there was the landmark Supreme Court case, Shelby versus Holder, where Shelby, Alabama challenged the constitutionality of part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And you've been very active in voting rights and critical of that court's decision in that case. I wonder, I know it's a complex situation, but could you just maybe talk a little bit about that case and its legacy?
Sure. It's a 2013 case decided by the United States Supreme Court. It's called Shelby County versus Holder. If you want to make me mad, you'll call it Shelby County versus Holder. It is the Shelby County case. I don't want my name associated with that case. That's like, you know, Dred Scott versus Holder or something. I don't want that. So the Shelby County case, just kind of boil it down, essentially takes away from the Justice Department its pre-clearance authority over covered jurisdictions whenever a state, local governmental entity, a county, wanted to make an electoral change in states with a proven history of racial discrimination, voter discrimination, had to get the approval of the Justice Department to make those changes. In a 5-4 decision, Chief Justice Roberts said very famously, America has changed. And as a result, pre-clearance authority, boiling down again, it gets more complicated, but we're going to take that authority away from the Justice Department. And we have seen since that time, I think, a whole range of things that have been put in place to make it more difficult for certain groups of people to vote, disproportionately people of color, young people, poorer folks, and a range of things have been done. It's about 1,700 polling places have been closed since the Shelby County decision. So when you see these long lines, part of it is, voter interest, but part of it also is as a result of the fact that there are fewer polling places. In Atlanta in 2020, the 2020 presidential election, after 5 o'clock, you go to the white part of Atlanta, it took you about 6 minutes to vote. You go to the black part of Atlanta, it took you 52 minutes to vote. Same day, same election, same city. 1,700 polling places. Voter purges around the country, disproportionately, again, communities of color. And all of these things would have been stopped by a Justice Department that had the pre-clearance authority. I think that's going to go down as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in history. It has brought into our electoral system, which has had a negative impact on our electoral system. It's made us less fair when it comes to democracy. You've seen a rise in racial and partisan gerrymandering that I think has a really negative, really negative impact. So there's a whole range of things that decision made possible that had the Supreme Court decided a different way and left that pre-clearance authority with the Department of Justice, we would not be, I think, in the crisis that we now face. I think our democracy is under attack. Our democracy, is at risk. And, for those who say, well, this is America, can never happen here, people don't understand or don't have knowledge of history. You see the rise of communism and fascism in the 20th century in Europe, not because fascism and communism were necessarily strong, but because the defense of democracy was weak. And I think that could happen here. Doesn't mean we'll have a dictator, but you could render meaningless, almost meaningless, our elections every 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever. And we could be a nation run by people in the minority in terms of popular support. You could have, majority of people think this is where the nation ought to be in terms of policies, things we support, things we stand for, but a nation run by people who don't necessarily, because of the way our systems would change, don't have majority support.
Changing those rules to make the ineffective. Well, both of you have been such champions of the value of civic engagement and public service, and we appreciate, for example, all of the civic engagement programs that you've been part of and that we've been able to support here at the university. The Chuck Hagel Symposium of Public Service for high school students, and then, of course, this event are both annual events. Attorney General Holder, your organization, All on the Line, targets gerrymandering, as you just mentioned, and there's an initiative at Columbia University that honors your legacy in this realm with the Eric H. Holder Jr. Initiative for Civil and Political Rights, and the American Voter Project explores the state of voting in the U.S. through events and programs. I guess my final question to ask you both to address in a couple minutes is, how can we, as educators and community members here, help cultivate this sense of civic engagement and value in public service, particularly adulthood?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think service is about oneself if you start there, and I think that's where you've got to start in trying to explain to young people why they should do this, why it's important. It's about them. And I think that's where you have to start. It's something that fulfills them. I mean, you don't have to run for office or be an attorney general or do all the things that you can do to be fulfilled in service to your community. There's so many other things like this all these people here know because they're all part of it. But I think that's where you got to start with the individual. Service is about them. And then it goes from there. I mean, service is about your community, your family, your friends. don't you want to help build a better community, a better life for people, more opportunities for people, fairer life opportunities? And so I think that if you start there and not preach to them, I mean, just talk to them and get their thoughts and so on and so on. Because I think over the years I've learned from listening to young people that they see kind of a service as a separate deal. Well, I got to make a living, I have to raise a family, I have all these other things. Well, yeah, that's all true, but a productive life is what you want. And service is part of that. That could be helping serve pancakes in the morning or whatever it is. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of ways to serve your friends and communities. And so that's the approach I think I would take, that I have always taken.
Now, one thing I'd say, Chuck said, you don't have to be Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, or Attorney General. But let me tell you, if you are, you get your own airplane.
And you could be, as a graduate of this university, you totally could be, because here's one right here.
I mean, I'm just saying, I never waited, that's one of the big shocks. I left office and it's like standing in line to get on a Delta flight. I'm like, and he had a lot of airplanes, I mean, I used to borrow his airplanes to go different places. But more seriously, I think young people should understand that the great social movements in this nation have always been led by young people. Our revolution, that we took on the mightiest empire in the world, was led by young people. The only old, younger than me at the time, but old founding father was Benjamin Franklin. The other ones were like in their 30s. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in his 30s. The women's suffrage movement, led by young women. The civil rights movement, led by young people. Martin Luther King, Diane Nash, John Lewis, young people. The anti-war movement in the 70s, young people. And so there's not a notion that you've got to be, gray-haired to be effective and to have an impact on your society and the direction of, the nation. On this day, when we think about the loss of Dr. King, I think about his words, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But here's the deal, it doesn't bend on its own. It only bends when people like us, people like you, put your hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And I think as Chuck was saying, the question is, what are you doing to pull that arc towards justice? Each of us should ask ourselves that question. It doesn't mean you have to be AG or the Secretary of Defense. It can be involvement in community activities. It doesn't even have to be political stuff, I mean, civic responsibility can take on a whole range of different activities. Helping people who are, dealing with nutritional issues. Young people, starve for the kind of attention that every American kid is entitled to, Youth programs, there's a whole variety of things. And I know it's not easy, If you're a young person, you've got studying to do, and I know you all study, I know that. You got to study, you want to have fun, because college is fun. And if you're young at heart, for those of us who are on the other side of college, business lives, personal lives, but find a way to carve out, just a couple of hours a week for some kind of civic engagement. You're going to feel, it might be difficult at first, but you work it into kind of your routine. You're going to feel better about yourself. Your community is going to be better for it, and the nation is going to be enhanced by that which you do. But especially for you young people, you're the biggest voting bloc in this country right now, But guess what? I've got more power than you do. I do. Because my generation, the baby boomers, we vote in a far greater proportion than young people do. And so baby boomers have a greater impact on the direction of the nation who serves in our state legislatures, Congress, Senate, President. There's untapped power in our younger generations. And if you look at our history, if you're conversant with our history, you understand that a motivated, focused, committed group of young people can change the direction of the nation, can change the world.
I think that's a good stopping point. I want to thank you both for Secretary Hagel for sponsoring this incredible event for our university and the nurturing that you've done for the next generation of American leaders. And I want to thank you, Attorney General Holder, for speaking to our students tonight, addressing these issues, challenging us to, to not be satisfied with the status quo. And I want to thank all of you, our students, faculty, administrators, and our university partner at the Atlantic Council, all of whom have worked together to bring you this event. We have one more special activity, I believe, Chancellor.
First and foremost, I hope you really appreciate tonight. We have very important VIP come and talk about civic engagement. And UNO promised you an engaging night. I hope you feel that way. There's a lot of things to unpack, right, from discussion of civil rights movement of this country all the way to world politics and complex geopolitics. But I think one of the takeaway for me is a lot of my cabinet members always complain I'm being impatient. I think Mr. Holder just gave me a compliment. I'm very impatient. So to honor our VIP, our honorable guest, former U.S. Attorney General, we are going to send for a very small token of our Maverick gift. I hope you can put your hand together and celebrate this moment with me.
That's outstanding. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, this was worth the whole trip.
Okay, Chancellor, come on over. He wants to get a picture with him.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
We can put
Can you ice skate?
No.
Just for show.
All right, there we go.
Thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you. Oh, this is definitely going to... That is cool.
You look good on you.
Oh, yeah.
Next year.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Great job, Jody. Thank you.